"You better not be dragging another dead squirrel into the yard, Daisy," I hollered, yanking the screen door open so hard it clanged against the side of the house. But my golden retriever didn't even flinch. She was already halfway across the cornfield behind our property, bounding through the tall stalks with that same frantic energy she'd had every morning for the past 3 weeks. It wasn't a squirrel, and deep down, I knew it. There was something about the way she tore off each day. Same direction, same time, always straight to that bend along Route 9. At first I thought maybe she was chasing after the scent of a raccoon, or had found some hidden stash of food, like when our neighbor's trash can got knocked over last winter. But no, this was different. This was obsession. And now it was starting to feel like something more than just weird dog behavior. I grabbed my keys and called to her brother, Buck, who was lying under the porch as usual, content to let the world pass him by. "Come on, boy. Let's go find your sister before she ends up as roadkill." Buck groaned, but got up. He was a shaggy old mutt with a heart of gold and a habit of falling asleep in the middle of whatever you asked him to do. Still, he always came when it counted. We got in my pickup and rolled down the gravel driveway, the morning air still cool and damp. The sun had just started to rise, casting gold across the fields like spilled paint. When we reached the bend, Daisy was already there, digging. It wasn't a spot you'd look at twice, just a patch of wild grass, half covered with discarded soda cans and a couple of broken branches. But she was digging like her life depended on it, her front paws tossing up dirt in every direction. I parked and stepped out. "Daisy, what on earth are you doing?" She didn't stop. She didn't even turn around. Buck wandered over and sniffed at the edge of the dirt mound she'd made, then sat down beside her like he knew this was going to take a while. I knelt down beside them and tried to grab Daisy's collar to pull her back. "You're gonna mess up your paws if you keep this up." But my hand brushed against something cool and hard sticking out of the soil. At first I thought it was a rock, but rocks don't have corners. And this had one, rounded, worn down, but unmistakably not part of the earth. I started digging with my hands. Buck let out a whine, and Daisy paused just long enough to look at me with eyes that said, "Finally." 10 minutes in, I realized it was a box. Not a jewelry box or a shoe box, but something heavier. Maybe a toolbox. It was metal, old and rusted, with a latch so corroded I had to pry it open with the tire iron from the truck. When it opened, the air changed. There wasn't anything scary inside. No bones, no weapons, just a few items that looked like they hadn't seen daylight in decades. A tattered baby blanket, a small stuffed rabbit missing an eye, and a silver locket with a faded photograph inside. A young girl, maybe 5 years old, blonde hair, smiling. I sat back, my mind spinning. What the heck is this? Daisy lay down beside me, her head resting near the open box like she was guarding it. Buck licked my hand. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew one thing. It mattered. And my dog had led me straight to it. I took the box back to the house, cleaned it off, and set it on the kitchen table. The locket was the most curious part. On the back was an engraving, "To Maddie, with all our love." That afternoon, I made a call to the local sheriff, Dale Hargrove. We'd gone to high school together, and while we hadn't talked in years, I figured this was the kind of thing you didn't just ignore. He came by just before sunset, his cruiser crunching up the drive. Dale was the kind of guy who never seemed to age, still wore the same beat-up boots and thick belt he'd worn back in school. "This what you called me about?" he asked, lifting the lid. "Yeah, Daisy found it buried near Route 9. She's been obsessed with that spot." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Strange. Looks like it's been there a while. Think it's worth looking into? He nodded. Yeah, I'll run the name. Maddie. Might be something. Might be nothing. But if a dog went this far to find it, I'd say it's something. Dale took the box, promised to call me if he found anything, and left. That night, Daisy didn't sleep. She paced the living room, then sat by the door like she was waiting for something. I let her out twice, and both times she ran back to the bend and sniffed around. The next morning she went again, and again she dug. This time I brought a shovel. What we found next wasn't a box, it was a piece of fabric. I pulled gently, uncovering what looked like the corner of a child's backpack. It was pink, faded from years underground, but still recognizable. Inside were more small toys, some candy wrappers, and a notebook, the pages so waterlogged I could barely read them. But one name stood out. Maddie Jameson. I drove straight to the sheriff's office. Dale looked up when I came in. You again? She found more. He took the backpack, his eyes narrowing. Now we've got a full name. He went into the back and came out 20 minutes later looking serious. Maddie Jameson, reported missing in 1997. Never found. She was 5. I felt cold. This was 28 years ago. He nodded. Yeah, but this stuff, it's fresh enough that someone must have buried it more recently. Someone tried to hide it, I said. Looks that way. Daisy didn't stop going to the spot. Over the next week, she led me back again and again, always to new sections of Earth, each with small, seemingly meaningless items. A crayon, a child's shoe, a broken bracelet. I started bringing Buck, too, and even he seemed to understand the gravity of it. They'd sniff, dig, pause, and then look at me like, here's another piece. Each time I called Dale, and each time he came out, logging the items, sending them to be tested, trying to piece together a story that had long been forgotten by most of the town. Then one day, Daisy stopped running. She just stood at the edge of the bend, staring at a patch of dirt like it hurt to look at it. I walked over, expecting her to dig again, but she didn't. She just sat down. I knelt beside her and touched the ground. It was softer here, recently disturbed. I dug. And this time I found bones. Human bones. I called Dale from my knees, my hands shaking. Daisy leaned into me, and Buck let out the saddest sound I'd ever heard him make. The sheriff came fast. Within an hour, the area was taped off. Crime scene techs arrived from the county. News vans rolled in the next morning. They confirmed it was a child, a girl, age consistent with Maddie Jameson. The whole town went quiet. And still Daisy wouldn't leave that spot. It was like she was keeping watch. For who or what, I didn't know. But there was something deeply comforting about having her there. Over the next few days, Dale reopened the case. Turns out Maddie's disappearance had always been suspicious. Her parents had given conflicting statements. They'd moved away shortly after the investigation went cold. But now, with physical evidence and a renewed interest, the pieces were finally falling into place. I watched the news reports from home. Daisy curled up beside me. Buck snoring near the fireplace. Every station called it a miracle. Dog uncovers clues in 28-year-old cold case. Reporters camped out by the bend. People brought flowers. Some came just to sit with Daisy and say thank you. But I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Because every morning, Daisy still woke up and walked to that bend. She didn't dig. She didn't sniff. She just sat. And I started to wonder, what else was buried out there, just waiting to be found? The morning after the sheriff confirmed the remains belonged to a child, I found myself staring at my coffee like it had the answers I needed. Daisy lay by the door, wide awake but unmoving. Buck sat close by, ears twitching with every creak of the floor. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe Daisy would stop obsessing over that bend now that we'd found what she was trying to show us. But instead, she just waited, as if another chapter was already unfolding and she was the only one who could read it. I stood up and grabbed her leash, though we both knew she didn't need it. She trotted beside me, out the door, and across the dew-covered field. When we reached the bend again, she paused. Then, without any fanfare, she walked several paces to the left and began sniffing the ground. No digging this time, just a slow, thoughtful inspection. Buck arrived a moment later, more interested in the squirrels chattering in the trees than the mysteries under the soil. But even he slowed down when Daisy sat down next to a patch of flattened grass and turned her head toward me. I crouched beside her. The spot didn't look like much, just more dirt, more grass, more of what we'd seen all around. But if Daisy thought it mattered, it did. So I began to dig. This time, the soil gave way to something different. A length of plastic, thin and torn, like a tarp that had been buried and forgotten. Beneath that, more fabric, this time bright yellow. I brushed it off carefully, revealing a jacket. A child's jacket. I didn't know what I was supposed to feel. Horror? Grief? Relief that the truth was coming out? It all collided into one heavy silence. Back at the house, I called Dale again. I didn't need to explain. When he answered, I just said, "She found more." He showed up within the hour, this time with a deputy and a woman from the county coroner's office. They taped off the area and brought in more gear. Gloves, evidence bags, and even a small tent to shield the site from curious eyes. It was becoming something bigger than just a story about a smart dog. It was becoming a revelation. Dale watched as they cataloged the jacket and dug deeper. "You know," he said, "when Maddie disappeared, there were rumors her family was mixed up in something. Her uncle, especially. But we never had proof." "Why didn't they search here?" I asked. He sighed. "Back then, Route 9 wasn't even paved. No one thought to look this far out." Daisy lay at my feet, ears twitching. Buck wandered in circles, eventually lying down next to her. Later that afternoon, a reporter from the local station showed up. Dale waved her off, but not before she snapped a photo of Daisy sitting calmly by the yellow tape. That photo would be everywhere by the end of the week. I didn't care about the attention. What I cared about was the way Daisy kept scanning the woods behind the bend, like she was waiting for someone else to show up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch with Daisy curled against my legs and Buck snoring by the door. Around midnight, Daisy got up and pressed her nose against the screen door, tail wagging low and slow. "You want to go back, girl?" I whispered. She didn't turn, just kept staring out into the dark. So I got up, pulled on my boots, and followed her out. The moon lit the field like silver, and we didn't need a flashlight. Daisy led the way, not to the bend this time, but further into the woods that bordered the far end of the property. Buck followed, though he seemed unsure of where we were going. We walked about 10 minutes before Daisy stopped. She sniffed at the base of a tree and sat down. I looked around, heart pounding. Nothing looked different, but I'd learned better than to question her by now. I marked the tree with a piece of blue tape from my pocket, the same kind I used when marking fence posts. Then we walked back, quiet, with the woods humming around us. The next morning, I brought my shovel. Daisy sat nearby, head tilted. Buck watched with a bored expression. I started digging. It wasn't deep, maybe a foot down, when the metal hit again. Another box. This one was smaller. I pried it open, and inside was a stack of photographs, the edges curled from time and moisture, kids in a schoolyard, a birthday party, a group picture with names written on the back in smudged ink. Maddie's name was there. And someone else's. Nathan Jameson. I stared. She had a brother? I drove straight to Dale's office again. He leaned back, flipping through the photos. Nathan Jameson. He was older. 7, I think. Died in a car accident 2 years after Maddie disappeared. That's what the record said. But what if he didn't? I asked. Dale looked at me, then at Daisy, who was sitting beside the door like a silent sentinel. You think there's more? I think Daisy does. He rubbed his chin. Then we better follow her lead. Over the next week, we did just that. Every morning, Daisy took me somewhere new. Sometimes it was just trinkets, a child's sock, a hairbrush, a toy car. Other times, it was more serious. A charred scrap of notebook paper with scribbles on it, a fragment of a newspaper from the late 90s. Piece by piece, a story began to take shape. The sheriff's office started reopening case files, missing persons, unsolved thefts, suspicious fires. And still, Daisy kept going. It felt like a mission. Not just for her, but for me. I stopped going into town, stopped answering reporters. My world had shrunk to the bend, the woods, and the path between them. One morning, Daisy ran straight past the bend and into a thicket I hadn't explored before. She pawed at a moss-covered stump and started barking. That bark wasn't her usual playful sound. It was sharper, urgent. I ran over, heart racing, and saw what she was barking at. A small, half-collapsed wooden structure buried under years of leaves and debris. It looked like a playhouse. Inside, I found old blankets, some broken plastic dishes, and what looked like a sleeping bag. On the wall, drawn in crayon, was a name. Nathan. Dale, I said into the phone. I think Maddie's brother was hiding out here, for a long time. Dale's voice was quiet. We never found a body, just assumed he'd been in the crash. But what if he wasn't? He arrived an hour later. They swept the playhouse, took samples, cataloged every item. Daisy stayed just outside the doorway, refusing to go in. By now, people were calling her a hero. There were offers to do interviews, brand deals, even a dog food commercial. I turned them all down, because Daisy didn't care about cameras. She cared about the truth. And something about that truth was still missing. One evening, I went out back with a flashlight. Daisy was already at the edge of the field, tail wagging. You still have something to show me? I asked. She trotted ahead, taking a new path through the trees. We ended up near the river that bordered the far end of my land. I hadn't been out that way in months. The path was muddy, and the air smelled like moss and fish. Daisy stopped near a pile of stones and sniffed. Buck caught up and sat beside her. I knelt down and began clearing the rocks. Underneath, I found a backpack. Inside were water bottles, a flashlight, and a spiral notebook. The first few pages were soaked, but deeper in, the writing was legible. They were letters. From Nathan to Maddie. He had survived. He had run, and he had tried to come back for her. The last entry chilled me. I saw them bury her. I tried to dig, but I couldn't. I'm sorry, Maddie. I'm so sorry. I sat there for a long time, the river whispering in the background. Daisy lay beside me, her breathing slow and steady. Buck stood guard, his eyes on the trees. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just held that notebook like it weighed more than anything I'd ever carried. When I finally stood up, I whispered, "We're not done yet, are we?" Daisy didn't move. She just looked at me with that same calm, knowing gaze she'd had the day she first took off across the cornfield. Whatever this journey was, it wasn't over. Not yet. 3 days after Daisy led me to the riverbank, and we found the notebook, I started seeing people parked on the side of Route 9. Some just stood with their hands in their jacket pockets, staring out across the field. Others brought their kids or their dogs, taking slow steps toward the edge of the yellow tape that still fluttered around the dig site. Most didn't try to talk to me. They just came and watched. Daisy didn't seem to mind. She would lie near the path, her head raised, ears alert. Some of the visitors left dog treats or thank you notes. Someone placed a small bouquet of daisies next to her usual resting spot by the bend. I didn't have the heart to move it. But the crowd wasn't what worried me. It was the fact that Daisy had stopped barking. Not a single woof since the backpack near the river. She wasn't sick. She ate fine, ran fine, still beat Buck to every stick I threw. But her voice was gone. It was as if she'd gone quiet on purpose. That morning, while the coffee percolated on the counter, I sat cross-legged on the floor beside her. "Is there something else you're trying to say, girl?" She tilted her head, but made no sound. Just placed one paw on my knee. I took that as a yes. Later that afternoon, Dale stopped by. Not in his cruiser this time. He came in his personal truck, the one with the cracked windshield and the rust spot near the tailgate. He looked tired. "We've got something," he said, walking up to the porch where Daisy lay. "You know that notebook? The last few entries. Some of the wording lines up with an anonymous letter we got back in '98. One that we never connected to Maddie or her family." "Who wrote it?" I asked. "That's the thing. We never figured it out. Came from a P.O. box. Just a few pages of scribbled out sentences and vague warnings. The kind of thing we thought was a hoax at the time. And now? Now I think that letter was written by Nathan." Daisy lifted her head, almost like she was listening. Dale crouched beside her. "This dog of yours, she's doing more police work than half the department." "She doesn't take days off," I said. We sat on the porch for a while, just watching the corn sway in the breeze. Dale pulled out a folder and handed me a photocopy of the letter. The handwriting was uneven, scrawled with a thick pen. They took her. I watched. I know who did it. I know where the red shovel is. I know what's in the blue box. I looked at Dale. "What blue box?" He shook his head. "We never figured that out. But maybe she will." He nodded toward Daisy. That night, after a short dinner and a quick walk around the yard, Daisy stood by the door again. Her posture told me everything. I needed to follow. We walked in silence, moonlight guiding the way. Buck stayed behind this time. He'd been limping a little, probably from all the recent running. I gave him a pat and told him to rest. Daisy took me along the tree line, past the old barn, and into the thicket near the creek bed. I hadn't been there in years. The trees grew tighter together, branches clawing at my jacket. She stopped near a fallen log and began sniffing the base of a tree. Then she sat. I sighed and pulled the small flashlight from my coat pocket, sweeping it across the ground. There were bits of plastic, some broken glass, and something metallic just barely sticking out from the dirt. I got down on my knees and started clearing it. It was blue, a box. Not the same kind we found earlier. It was longer, deeper, like an old toolbox. When I finally lifted the lid, a cold rush hit my face. Inside were 3 items: a rusted shovel head, no handle, a pair of children's shoes with the name Maddie written inside in permanent marker, and a plastic bag with something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it slowly. It was a necklace. Gold, shaped like a bird. I didn't recognize it. but the tag attached to the bag read, "Recovered from sight, 1998. I stared at the tag. "How the heck?" Daisy whined. The first sound I'd heard from her in days. I looked at her, my heart pounding. "You knew this was here, didn't you?" She pawed gently at the ground beside the box, then stepped back. By the time I got it home and called Dale, it was past midnight. He arrived looking even more exhausted than before, but when he saw the items, his eyes sharpened. "This is the shovel the letter talked about. I'd bet my badge on it." "And the shoes?" "Matches Maddie's school records. She wore orthopedic soles. See the stitching?" We sat at my kitchen table, papers and evidence bags spread out like a crime board. I poured us both coffee. "This necklace," I said. "Any chance it's connected to someone?" Dale nodded slowly. "There was a neighbor. She babysat Maddie once or twice. She had a pendant just like this. Wore it every day. Said her grandma gave it to her." "What's her name?" He looked down. "Angela Roth. Died in 2003. Suicide." We sat in silence. "Dale," I said quietly, "what if this whole thing is bigger than just Maddie?" He didn't answer, just drank his coffee and stared at the necklace. The next few days, Daisy refused to leave the house. She paced a little, sniffed near the door, but didn't push to go out. It was like she knew it was time to wait. I used the downtime to start mapping every site she'd taken me to. I marked them with red pins on an old paper map from the glove compartment. When I stepped back, something jumped out at me. They formed a circle. More than that, they formed a pattern, like a message or a trail. One I hadn't seen until now. When I showed Dale, he rubbed his temples. "This can't be a coincidence." "It's not." He traced a finger across the map. "And this center point right here, that's where the old station used to be." "The sheriff's office?" "Back in the 90s, yeah, before we moved it downtown." I stared at the center. "Dale, are you saying someone might have planted things in a circle around the old station? Why would they do that?" "I don't know. But I think someone was trying to send a message, maybe not to us, maybe to Nathan." That night, I dreamt of the woods. In the dream, Daisy was barking, loud and sharp, and I was running after her through a tunnel of trees. She stopped by a well. When I reached her, I looked down and saw light inside it. Then I woke up, sweating. The next morning, Daisy stood at the door again. We walked back into the woods, and I let her lead me. She didn't go fast. It was more like a procession now, quiet and steady. We ended up near the edge of an old property line where a stone wall crumbled under years of moss. There, hidden beneath ivy and fallen branches, was what looked like the outline of an old well. I froze. "From the dream," I whispered. Daisy sniffed the stones, then lay down, resting her chin on her paws. I didn't touch anything that time. I called Dale. He brought a team the next morning. They dug slowly, carefully. The well had long since collapsed, but the cavity beneath had held something. A diary. Inside, entries dated from 1997 to 2002. Pages written in the same hand as the notebook. Nathan's hand. One entry stood out. "I buried it all. I kept her secrets. I kept their secrets. I just wanted to go home." Daisy hadn't moved for hours. She just lay there, eyes half closed, like she was keeping guard one last time. When the crew finished cataloging the diary, Dale stood beside me and said, "This boy saw too much, and he tried to fix it all by hiding it. And Daisy's showing us what he left behind." piece by piece. There was one more entry, almost at the back of the diary, written shakily. I left the last box under the place where she used to laugh. We didn't know what that meant, but I had a feeling Daisy did. And I knew, with every step we'd taken so far, that she would show us where it was. I hadn't been back to the old playground in years, not since the town moved the elementary school to a bigger campus on the other side of Maple Ridge. The old place had been left to rot. Swings rusted stiff, the slide caked with leaves and bird droppings, the wooden playhouse tagged up by bored teenagers with nothing better to do. It used to be full of life. Back in the day, you could hear kids laughing all the way from the gas station. So when Daisy stopped just beyond the rotted fence, her eyes locked on the jungle gym, I felt that familiar pressure rise in my chest. "This where she used to laugh?" I asked aloud. Daisy didn't answer, of course. She just sat, her tail sweeping slow arcs in the dirt. I looked around. It was mid-morning, sky overcast, clouds moving slow like they didn't want to be anywhere in particular. No one was out here. No one had been in years. I took a few cautious steps into the playground. The grass was long, brittle under my boots. I walked past the swings and stopped at the carousel, one of those old metal ones you had to run beside and jump on. It creaked slightly in the wind. Daisy followed close behind, then paused near the slide. She sniffed along the base, circled twice, then lay down with her front paws stretched out. She didn't dig. Not this time. She just waited. I walked to her side and squatted, running my hand across the compacted earth. It was hard. No visible sign anything had been disturbed. But the way Daisy watched it, it was like she could hear something buried that I couldn't. I went back to the truck for the shovel I kept in the bed. When I returned, Buck had wandered up from the house and sat beside Daisy like he'd always belonged there. I smiled, gave him a quick scratch between the ears, then got to work. The first few inches were dry. Stubborn. The kind of dirt that hadn't been touched in years. Then I hit a pocket of softer soil. I slowed down, moving more carefully now. After about 20 minutes of digging, the shovel struck something hollow. My heart jumped. I got on my knees and cleared it with my hands, fingers brushing against cool plastic. It was a small storage bin, one of those semi-transparent kinds you'd find in any kid's bedroom. The lid had duct tape wrapped around it several times, almost like whoever sealed it was in a hurry. I peeled it off, the tape pulling up flakes of dirt and dust. Inside were more photos, some in color, some black and white. Most looked like they'd been taken with an old Polaroid, some bent, others curled at the corners. Kids. Same ones from the other box. Only this time, they weren't smiling. I stared at one where Maddie stood beside a man in a tan jacket, her face blank, arms hanging at her sides. Another showed Nathan, but older than I'd ever seen him, maybe 11 or 12. His eyes looked tired. There was a folder underneath the stack. I opened it to find several loose sheets, drawings in crayon and pencil. One was of the playground, clearly this one, with stick figures all around the slide. Another showed a house with red windows, smoke coming from one side. The final page was different. A map. Hand-drawn. It had markers. The playground, the old sheriff's office, the river, the cornfield. And in the center, circled twice in red ink, was something labeled only as cave. I sat back on my heels and looked at Daisy. She stood now, ears raised. "You knew we needed this, didn't you?" I said. She stepped forward, nudged the edge of the box with her nose, then turned and started walking back toward the fence. That afternoon, I drove the bin to Dale's office. He stared at the map for a long time. "This cave spot? I don't recognize it," he said. I tapped the page. "But the other places match perfectly. He made this for someone. Maybe even for himself, to remember where he hid everything. Or he made it for someone he hoped would come looking." I didn't say anything. The air in Dale's office felt heavier than usual. "We should find that cave," I said. He nodded. "We'll need to be careful. If there's more there, it could be sensitive." The next morning, Dale brought in a deputy named Travis and a young guy from the fire department who'd done some training in cave search and rescue. I showed them the map, and we all sat in my kitchen tracing possible routes using topographic lines and some satellite maps Dale had printed off. By noon, we'd narrowed it down to a patch of forest about 1.5 miles past the river. Old hunting land. Not many folks went that deep anymore. Daisy, meanwhile, paced by the door like she knew exactly what was coming. We packed up gear, headlamps, rope, first aid kits, and set out. It took nearly an hour to hike to the area we'd circled. The forest grew denser the deeper we went, all pine and shadow. The air got cooler. Daisy led the way, tail low, movements quiet. She stopped suddenly at a patch of brush, sniffed, then pushed her way through. Behind the brambles was a narrow opening in the rock, almost invisible, unless you were right on top of it. Dale looked at me. "You want to wait out here with the dogs?" I shook my head. "I'm going in." We crouched and crawled inside. The space opened into a low corridor, just tall enough to stand if you stayed near the center. Our lights bounced off the damp stone walls. About 20 feet in, we found the first sign, a pile of worn blankets, a rusted lantern, and an old toy truck. Then, tucked into a carved-out niche in the stone, a tin lunchbox. Inside were more notes. Folded pieces of paper, some written in ink, others in what looked like charcoal. They were addressed to no one in particular. She kept telling me to wait. I waited. I waited so long. I heard her crying once. From above. But I couldn't get out. I was too scared. Travis handed me another page. This one was torn and smudged. I saw him. The man with the tan coat. He came to check. I stayed quiet. We all went silent. "I think Nathan hid here," I said. "Maybe for days. Maybe longer." Dale sighed. "Poor kid probably thought the cave was safer than going home." We found one more thing, a small tin box wedged into a crevice. Inside it, a pocket knife, a photo of Maddie, and a dried daisy. When we emerged from the cave, blinking against the daylight, Daisy was sitting right where I left her, staring at the opening. She stood when I stepped out and licked my hand. We walked back in silence, the air buzzing with unseen questions. Back at the house, Dale spread everything out on the dining table again. The picture of the man in the tan coat now felt like a loaded gun. "We need to find out who this man is," I said. "I already checked the school records. One of Maddie's teachers from that year fit the description. He moved to Arizona in '99. Name's Carl Danning." "You think he had something to do with it?" "Too early to say, but his name did come up in one of the early interviews, and now it's on a handwritten confession, basically." Dale left with the evidence, promising to start tracking down anyone who might remember Mr. Danning. That evening, the air turned cold. A storm rolled in quick from the west, the kind that doesn't ask permission. Thunder rattled the windows, and I found myself in the living room with both dogs curled at my feet. Daisy sat up and gave a soft chuff, her ears flicking toward the back door. I looked up. "You want to go out in this?" She barked once, short, urgent. So I grabbed my coat, pulled on my boots, and followed her into the storm. She didn't run. She walked, deliberate, slow, as if each step mattered. The rain soaked through my sleeves. Lightning cracked in the sky. She led me to the old oak tree on the east end of the property. I hadn't paid much attention to it in years. Used to be a picnic spot. Daisy stopped and began pawing at the base of the tree. I knelt beside her, digging through wet leaves and muddy soil. My fingers hit something smooth and round, a metal tin. Inside was a tape cassette, labeled in messy handwriting, "For when it's safe." My heart skipped. I didn't have a tape player anymore, but Dale would. I wrapped the cassette in a towel and looked at Daisy. She licked my hand, then turned and walked back toward the house. Her job, at least for now, done. And I followed, already knowing this next piece would take us deeper into whatever secrets Nathan Jameson had tried so hard to leave behind. It took Dale less than an hour to find an old tape recorder. He said it had been sitting in his garage under a pile of Halloween decorations and fishing rods, the kind of thing he always meant to throw out, but never got around to. That night, he brought it over in a cardboard box, the cord tangled, dust clinging to every seam. We set it up on my kitchen table, both of us hovering like we were defusing a bomb. Daisy sat just beside my chair, tail flicking, ears perked. Buck lay across the floor like a rug, snoring softly, oblivious to everything. Dale pushed the cassette into the slot and hit play. Static. Then a voice. A boy's voice. Quiet at first, so soft I had to lean in. "If you're hearing this, it means I didn't make it out. Or I did and I forgot. Or I got scared again. I don't know. I just needed to say what happened, in case someone ever listens." Dale and I exchanged a glance. The boy continued. "My name's Nathan Jameson. I was 11 when I made this. I saw what happened to Maddie. I didn't know what to do. I ran. I didn't tell anyone because they said they'd hurt me too. I believed them." His voice cracked. "There was a man, Mr. Danning. He said he was going to help us. He brought snacks. Said we could play after school while we waited for our parents. But it was always just us. Me and Maddie. And then one day it was just Maddie." I leaned back, the weight of it all settling in my chest. "I saw them bury her. I was hiding in the trees. He didn't know I was there. I couldn't move. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I thought if I stayed quiet, I'd be safe. But I wasn't. I was scared every single day after that." The static returned for a moment. Then a click. "I made boxes. I buried things. I tried to remember. I left the drawings and the letters and the map. Maybe someone smarter than me will figure it out. I don't know. I just wanted someone to know I tried. I tried to help her. I'm sorry I couldn't." Then silence. Dale hit stop. We didn't speak. Outside, the wind blew across the field, rattling the storm windows. Inside, Daisy shifted closer and laid her head on my foot. After a minute, Dale stood up. "That settles it. I'm calling the district attorney. We've got enough now to reopen everything. If Danning's alive, we'll find him." The next week passed in a blur. Investigators came out from the state office. They reopened the old school, digging through records, checking fingerprints. Dale gave them everything. Photos, drawings, cassette, even the map. News vans started circling again. I told them to stay off the property. Most listened, a few didn't. One guy tried sneaking around the fence and nearly got himself bitten by Buck. Through it all, Daisy stayed calm, patient, focused. She started walking the property again, early mornings and just before dusk. Not frantic, not aimless, like she was checking her work, making sure every message had been delivered. Then came the phone call. Dale rang me just after sunset. "He's alive," he said. "Carl Danning, living in Tucson under a different name. We're working with Arizona law enforcement to bring him in for questioning." "Will they charge him?" "Too early to say. But with the tape, the diary entries, and the items Daisy helped us find, we've got a strong case, especially if any of the DNA holds up." Daisy sat near the door, watching me talk. She didn't wag her tail, just stared. The next morning, she wouldn't eat. I poured her kibble, added a splash of broth like usual. She sniffed it, turned her head. Buck gobbled his down in 10 seconds flat, then wandered over to nudge her bowl. She didn't protest. She was tired. I could see it in the way she moved, slower now, like she carried weight I couldn't see. I gave her space, but she stayed close, always within reach. That afternoon, Dale showed up with a deputy and 2 crime scene analysts. He asked if we could walk the property one more time, retrace Daisy's steps. We did. From the bend on Route 9 to the riverbank, through the woods to the old playhouse, and finally the cave. She followed without hesitation, sniffed each spot, paused, then moved on, like she was walking us through a memory. When we returned to the house, one of the analysts asked if Daisy had been trained. "No," I said. "She just knows." They took notes, lots of them. I saw one scribble something like, "Possible scent memory imprint" on a clipboard, but I didn't read the rest. They didn't get it. This wasn't about training. It wasn't even about instinct anymore. It was about heart. That evening, I took Daisy out to the porch with me. We sat together in silence as the sky turned orange and the clouds thinned into streaks of light. Buck laid under the swing, occasionally swatting at flies with his paw. I rubbed behind her ears. "You've done more than enough, girl." She leaned into me. The next morning, she woke me up with a bark. It was the first one I'd heard in days. Sharp, clear, insistent. I jumped out of bed and followed her outside. She ran, faster than I'd seen her in weeks, straight toward the edge of the woods. I called after her, heart pounding. Buck trailed behind us, confused, but determined. Daisy stopped near the edge of the creek, the one where we'd found the backpack. She barked again, then began to dig. I dropped to my knees and started helping. The dirt here was loose, damp. We didn't have to go far. My fingers hit something. I brushed it off. It was another box, smaller than the others. Wood, not plastic or metal. Carved on the top were the initials MJ. I opened it slowly. Inside was a photo. Maddie, holding a stuffed rabbit, smiling, and beneath it, a folded note, for the one who came looking. I swallowed hard, unable to speak. Daisy laid down beside the box, nose close, tail still. I called Dale, told him what we found. When he arrived, he sat next to me without a word. Just looked at the photo, then at Daisy. "This belonged to Maddie," he said quietly. "Looks like she wanted someone to find it." We packed the box carefully and walked back in silence. That night, Daisy slept soundly, curled at the foot of the bed. And for the first time in a long while, I dreamed of nothing at all. The following day, Dale got a call from Arizona. Carl Danning was in custody. They'd matched partial DNA from one of the toys in the cave to Maddie's case file. It was enough. An arrest warrant was being issued. When Dale told me, I looked down at Daisy. She was resting again, eyes closed, body still. Buck sat beside her like a sentry. We didn't celebrate, not yet, because Daisy stood up, stretched, and walked to the door. And I knew what that meant. There was still something out there, something we hadn't found yet, something she needed us to see. Daisy led us back to the bend, as if we hadn't already uncovered more truth from that stretch of land than anyone ever expected. The morning was quiet, unusually so, like even the birds had paused to see what she'd find next. I followed her, not bothering to leash her. By now, she had proven herself more sure of her path than anyone holding a map ever could. Buck lumbered along behind us, still slightly sore from all the excitement lately. He hadn't stopped following her, though. Loyalty came easy to him. Daisy didn't stop at the usual spots. She walked past the old digging sites, past the taped-off markers left by the investigators. Then she veered into a patch of overgrown brush I hadn't looked at before. It was thick with weeds and thorny vines, wild and forgotten. She stopped, nose pressed to the ground. She sniffed in small circles, then looked at me. I pulled out the gloves from my coat pocket and knelt down. She stepped back, letting me work. The soil was loose again, too loose to be natural. I pushed through the top layer until something flat scraped against my knuckles, a piece of wood. I cleared the edges and pulled it free. It was a board, warped by time, and under it was a shallow hole filled with old damp newspapers. I peeled them back carefully. Beneath the paper was a stack of envelopes, each sealed, each labeled in the same shaky handwriting we'd seen before. Nathan's handwriting. I picked one up. It said, "For the principal." Another, "For the neighbor with the red mailbox." A third, "For anyone who sees this and still cares." I brought the stack home, placed them on the kitchen table, and called Dale. He showed up within the hour, eyes tired but alert. When he saw the envelopes, he sat down slowly. "These were meant to be read," he said. He wanted people to know. We opened the first few together. They weren't just letters. They were confessions, observations, memories. Nathan had written down everything he remembered, the way Danning acted during lunch duty, how Maddie started to grow quiet at school. He mentioned other names, too, kids we hadn't heard about before, some who moved away, some who might still be around. "He tried to warn everyone," I said. "Even as a kid, he knew something was wrong and tried to fix it." "He was scared, but he didn't stop," Dale said. "Same as Daisy." He took photos of the letters, then packed them up to enter as evidence. "These will help the prosecution, and maybe help others come forward." Daisy curled up beside my chair as we talked, as if she'd been waiting for someone to finally say it out loud. After Dale left, I sat in silence, reading the last letter in the stack. It was addressed to the man with the flashlight. It read, "I saw you one night. You were out there, looking. Maybe you didn't even know what you were looking for, but you had a flashlight. You walked slow. You didn't shout. I wasn't brave enough to answer you. But thank you. If you come back, maybe you'll see this." I put it down, hand shaking just a little. I didn't remember being near that bend as a younger man, not at night, not with a flashlight. But maybe I had been. Maybe he saw someone else, or maybe it didn't matter. Daisy stirred beside me, stood up, and walked to the back door. We went again. This time she didn't head for the fields. She took a sharp turn along the fence line and followed it north, toward the edge of the property where the woods grew denser. It was a place I rarely visited. Too many fallen logs, too much underbrush. She moved with purpose, like she knew exactly where she was going. We walked almost half a mile through tangled growth until she stopped at a large, hollowed-out tree. The inside was blackened, maybe from lightning years ago. Daisy sniffed once, then lay down. I hesitated. Then I knelt and peered inside. Tucked in the base, wrapped in an old t-shirt, was another item. A pair of glasses, small, square-framed, with one lens missing. I pulled them out gently. Tucked beneath them was a folded page, yellowed and fragile. I opened it. Another letter, this one shorter. Maddie said he took her to the teacher's lounge first. She thought it was a game. I should have gone with her. I should have yelled. I didn't. The guilt in those words sat like a weight in my palm. I walked back slowly, Daisy at my side, Buck trailing behind. When I handed Dale the glasses and note later that day, he exhaled hard. "We've got photos of her wearing these glasses," he said. "This is something." It was more than something. It was a breadcrumb. Another piece Nathan had left behind. Dale spent the next few days working with state prosecutors and local law enforcement. They reopened a background investigation on Carl Danning, digging deeper into every school he'd ever worked at. It turned out he'd moved around a lot. 3 states, 4 districts, all with gaps in employment. That news hit like a hammer. Dale called me the next night. "We've got reports of 2 more kids who went missing in areas Danning worked in. One was ruled a runaway, the other a drowning. But we're reopening both." I looked at Daisy, who had lifted her head at the sound of Dale's voice over the speaker. "Tell her thank you," Dale said. The following morning, Daisy woke me up again. But this time, she didn't bark. She just stared at me until I sat up, then walked to the door. We walked north again, past the tree with the glasses, through a thicker patch of forest, where even the deer trails thinned. She paused near a slope I hadn't noticed before. It led down to a dried-out stream bed. Daisy sniffed, turned in a circle, then sat down beside a large, flat rock. I brushed aside the leaves and found another board nailed into the ground. This time, it was a time capsule. A real one. Inside were toys, drawings, a few small school items. A wooden ruler, a pink eraser, a button from a jean jacket. But the drawings, they were different. They were newer. One showed a large figure in a classroom, towering over smaller ones. Another showed a dog, furry and golden, standing beside a boy. And then one that showed a grave. A hand sticking out from it, a person nearby holding a shovel. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I walked the path myself. No dogs, just me. I sat beside the time capsule site for a long time. I didn't dig. I just listened. Because maybe that's what Nathan had always wanted. Someone to sit, to hear him, to remember. Daisy joined me around midday. She didn't sit right away. She sniffed around the edge of the stream bed, then nudged my arm. She wanted me to move. I followed her another few paces along the dry bank, to a spot where the soil had cracked open slightly. And there, tucked between 2 exposed tree roots, was a final item. A wristwatch, still ticking. It had a cracked face and a leather band, but the time was right. I turned it over. On the back was an engraving. "Love you forever, Dad." I didn't know what to make of it, but Daisy did. She sat down beside it and waited. Later, Dale identified the watch. It had belonged to Maddie's father. He'd reported it stolen years before Maddie went missing. Said it disappeared from his truck one day. The fact it ended up in the woods, perfectly preserved. It told a story we hadn't even begun to understand. And Daisy, she was still watching. Still leading. Because something else was still out there. And she wasn't going to stop until she found it. The wristwatch sat on my kitchen table, its ticking the only sound in the house that night. I must have stared at it for an hour, turning it over in my hands, wondering how something so small could carry the weight of an entire story. Daisy lay nearby, dozing but alert, her head lifting slightly every time I shifted in my chair. Buck was out cold on the rug, legs twitching in a dream. I couldn't stop thinking about the engraving. Love you forever. Dad. Maddie's father had reported the watch stolen, sure, but what if it had been taken for a reason? What if Nathan had kept it because it reminded him of something safe? Something before everything fell apart? I called Dale. You sitting down? I asked. I've learned to sit before picking up your calls, he said. What now? I told him about the watch, about the engraving, about where Daisy had found it. He was quiet a moment, then said, I'll get in touch with Maddie's father. He's still listed at a P.O. box in Michigan. Haven't talked to him since the initial re-examination of the case. Maybe it's time. The next morning, Daisy was up early again. She paced the porch, tail low, ears forward. She wasn't excited. She was focused. We walked toward the east fence line, the same path we'd taken many times now, but this time she broke off and headed toward the neighboring property. The old Mason farm. The place had been empty for years. The barn was collapsed, the silo tilted, the house boarded up. Last I heard, the land had passed to a cousin who never came back to claim it. I hesitated at the property line. It didn't feel right to trespass, but Daisy didn't care about boundaries. She hopped over the low fence and kept going, nose down, tail twitching. I followed. We passed through what used to be a garden, now just a mess of vines and weeds. Beyond it was a rusted swing set, one swing still hanging by a single chain. And past that, near the back shed, Daisy stopped. She sniffed around the side of the shed, circled, then started pawing at the ground beneath a window that had long since lost its glass. I knelt down and brushed away the topsoil. My fingers hit wood, another box. But this one wasn't like the others. It was newer. Not freshly buried, but not decades old either. It had a combination lock. I sat back, breath catching. Who buried this? I said aloud. Daisy didn't move. She just stared. I carried it home and placed it beside the watch. Then I called Dale again. You're not going to believe this, I said. Try me. I told him about the box, the combination lock, the location. He showed up before lunch with a lockpick set and a newer deputy named Scott, who didn't say much but wrote down everything like he was recording gospel. It took 10 minutes to get the lock open. The lid creaked as it lifted. Inside was a manila folder, clean, crisp, the kind used in offices. On the tab was a single word, payments. I opened it slowly. Inside were receipts, bank slips, handwritten ledgers, a paper trail that spanned nearly 15 years. Dale whistled. These look like payouts, regular ones, same amounts, same names. He flipped through the documents and stopped at one slip in particular. This address, he said. That's the principal from Maddie's old school. You think someone was being paid to stay quiet? Dale nodded slowly. Or to look the other way. We laid everything out on the table. The payments started in '98 and ended in 2013. Names included the principal, a former custodian, and a name we hadn't seen before, Emsa Cormack. Cormack? I asked. Worked for child services in the late '90s, Dale said. Handled some of the reports from Maddie's neighborhood. And all these people got payments. Looks like it. And someone buried this? Someone who wanted it found, he said. We both looked at Daisy, who'd been sitting quietly in the corner, tail wrapped around her side. She's not just finding bones and toys, I said. She's finding the story. Dale nodded. And the cover-up. He left with the folder, promising to start cross-referencing names, reaching out to internal affairs. That night, I sat on the porch with Daisy, while Buck snoozed beside us. You're doing more good than most people ever do in their lifetime, I told her. She nudged my hand, then curled up against my leg. The next day, we got a call. Dale's voice was tight. Maddie's father is coming back. He wants to see the watch. When? Tomorrow morning. I spent that night pacing the living room, checking the box every hour to make sure the watch was still there. When he arrived, I barely recognized him. Gray hair, thin face, hands that shook when he reached out to take the watch. I gave her this on her 5th birthday, he said. Told her she could give it back to me when she graduated. He sat down at the table, holding it like a lifeline. Where'd you find it? I pointed toward the woods. Daisy led us there. He looked down at her. You remembered, didn't you? She walked over and pressed her nose to his knee. He cried. Later, he told us things we hadn't known. That Maddie had become withdrawn in the months before she vanished. That she once told him she didn't want to go to school anymore. That he'd filed a complaint about a teacher who'd made her uncomfortable. The complaint disappeared, he said. No follow-up. They told me I misunderstood. Dale took down everything. Before he left, Maddie's father crouched beside Daisy and said, "Thank you." She wagged her tail once. The following week was a storm of movement. Dale's team began contacting former school staff. The Arizona authorities had started building a broader case against Danning. The payments we found raised suspicions about others who might have protected him. And Daisy? She waited. She spent her days near the tree line, watching. Not pacing, just still, like she knew something was coming. Then, one morning, she barked. A single bark, loud and clear, she ran. Not toward the woods, not toward the bend, but toward the road. I grabbed my coat and followed. She crossed Route 9 and went straight for a small pull-off I hadn't paid attention to before. It was overgrown now, but once it might have been a rest stop. She stopped at a tree stump, circled, then pawed at the edge. I dug. A rusted tin box, not unlike the others. Inside was a single Polaroid, a photo of Maddie and Nathan, sitting side by side on a swing, both smiling. And behind them, a third figure, blurred, standing near the edge of the frame. I didn't recognize the shape, not yet, but I would. On the back of the photo, one line. He always stood just far enough away. I took it to Dale that afternoon. He stared at the photo for a long time. This man wasn't Danning, he said. Look at the height, the frame. I think we missed someone. The investigation shifted again. And Daisy, patient as ever, sat by the door, waiting to show us the next piece. The figure in the photograph wasn't clear. Blurred at the edge of the frame, head turned away, nothing but a faint outline of a man standing just behind Maddie and Nathan on the swing set. But there was something about it. A shape. A posture. Like someone waiting, someone watching but never stepping forward. Dale stared at it longer than I'd ever seen him stare at anything. "This isn't Danning," he repeated, tapping the edge of the photo. "The build is wrong. Danning's tall but wiry. This guy's broader, bigger shoulders. And he's not looking at the camera," I added. "He's watching them." Dale nodded, then grabbed his folder and flipped through the pages. "You remember that name from the payment records? M. Cormack?" "Yeah. Child services, right?" "Not just that. Before he worked in social services, he was a substitute teacher. Did a few weeks at Maddie's school." "You think that's him?" "I don't know yet, but I've got his old personnel file. I'm going to compare it." We scanned the image into Dale's office computer and used a facial recognition tool to get a rough shape of the figure's dimensions. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but the estimate it gave lined up more with Cormack than Danning. "Could be him," Dale muttered. "Would explain a lot. The payments, the silence. Maybe he was the one making sure Danning's mess didn't get traced back." "He always stood just far enough away," I said again, rereading the line on the back of the photo. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch with Daisy, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, sipping lukewarm tea while the wind stirred the treetops. Daisy lay curled beside me. She wasn't tense, but I could tell she was waiting. Her ears twitched every few seconds. Her eyes flicked toward the fields as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then she stood up. It was a slow movement, almost hesitant. She walked to the edge of the porch, looked back at me once, and then headed down the steps. I followed without a word. We walked toward the edge of the woods, past the tree where she'd found the watch, past the time capsule, through the darker patch where even the moonlight had trouble touching the ground. She stopped near a dead tree, one I hadn't paid attention to before. It was split down the middle, blackened by old lightning. At the base was a tangle of brush. She sniffed it once, sat down, and waited. I pulled on my gloves and started to clear the area. The brush was thick, knotted with dry vines and old roots. It took nearly 10 minutes to get through it all, but when I did, I found a heavy wooden box. It was sealed with nails. No lock this time, just a hammer and brute force standing in the way. I carried it home, set it on the kitchen floor, and pried the lid open with the back end of a crowbar. Inside was a stack of VHS tapes, each labeled with a date, each one falling between the spring of 1996 and the summer of 1990. I stared at them, hands going cold. Why would someone bury this? The next day, I found an old player at a second-hand shop. The woman at the counter gave it to me for $5 and a slice of banana bread I had in my truck from the morning. Dale came over as soon as I called. We didn't talk much. We just plugged the player into my old TV and hit play. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. The first tape showed a classroom. Empty at first. Then the door opened and kids filed in. We watched as they took their seats, laughed, talked. A few minutes passed before a man entered from the back. He didn't look like a teacher. He didn't carry any books. He stood near the wall, barely moving, just watching. I looked at Dale. "That's the guy from the photo." He nodded. "That's Cormack." We watched 3 tapes that day. Each one showed different scenes. Kids playing outside, sitting in a library, walking in the hallway. Always with that same man nearby. Never engaging, never speaking. Just present. Dale took the tapes to be digitized for evidence. "You realize," he said, "this means someone knew. Someone was filming. Someone buried this to make sure it wouldn't disappear." "Maybe Nathan," I said. "Maybe someone else." Daisy watched us from the doorway. That night, she didn't sleep. Neither did I. She paced the house, checking each room. Every so often, she'd walk up to me, touch my hand with her nose, then return to her post by the front door. The next morning, I found a package on the porch. No label, no return address. Inside was a single cassette tape. Audio. No markings. I called Dale. He showed up in 20 minutes. We played the tape. A man's voice, older, rough. I knew what they were doing. I watched for years. They told me if I stayed quiet, I'd be fine. They paid me. I took it. I didn't know it would go this far. But once you're in, you're in. You can't just walk away. He paused. If you're hearing this, it means you found the tapes, the letters, maybe even the photos. Maybe you're smarter than we were. Maybe you're not afraid. There was a click, then silence. Dale sat back. That's a confession. Is it Cormack? Sounds like him. We'll have to compare it to his old interviews. But I think so. They arrested him the next day. Cormack didn't deny it. He asked for a lawyer, then refused to speak. But with the evidence mounting, the letters, the photo, the payment logs, the tapes, they didn't need much more. And Daisy? She slept. For the first time in weeks, she slept through the night. But it wasn't over. The next morning, she stood by the porch again, ears forward, tail still. I joined her. Where to, girl? She didn't lead me far this time, just past the barn, to the edge of the field where the sun was just beginning to burn off the fog. There, half buried beneath a rock, was a small metal tinnin. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, water-stained but legible. A drawing. 2 kids, a dog, and a man standing far behind them. At the bottom, a sentence. If you found this, you were never supposed to stop looking. I sat down in the dirt, holding the drawing, and Daisy laid her head on my knee. She'd found every piece, carried every memory, led us through the shadows of someone else's silence. But I knew she wasn't done. Not yet, because she stood again and looked toward the far side of the field, where something else still waited to be found. The field was quiet, just like the morning after a storm. The air had that strange stillness that always came before something changed. I could feel it in my chest, that tightening like the first cold breath of winter. Daisy stood at the edge, tail stiff, her gaze fixed toward a cluster of trees that bordered the eastern rise. We'd walked past them before, dozens of times, but this time she didn't glance back. She didn't wait. She went in. I followed. Buck stayed behind, sitting like a statue on the porch. He didn't whine or bark, didn't pace or tug. It was like he knew this wasn't his part of the journey. This one belonged to her. We moved through the trees, deeper than I'd ever gone on foot. The brush was thick, years of branches and leaves untouched by human hands. Daisy didn't slow. She moved with purpose, her paws picking through the undergrowth like she'd walked this path in dreams. It took nearly 20 minutes to reach the clearing. It wasn't much. A circle of short grass surrounded by thick oaks. In the center stood a single post, old and weathered, like it had once been part of a fence that no longer existed. At the base of the post was a ring of stones. Nothing fancy, just a ring, like someone had marked it and walked away. Daisy walked right to the center and sat. I hesitated. Then I dropped to my knees and started brushing away the leaves. I expected another box, Another set of letters, a toy, a photo, something like all the others she'd shown me. But this was different. There was nothing buried there, just a plaque. Metal, bolted into the post, almost invisible under the moss. I scrubbed it clean with my sleeve. The words were short, barely a sentence. This is where I said goodbye. I leaned back, breath catching in my throat. Daisy didn't move. I sat beside her for a while, staring at the plaque, trying to imagine it. The boy who had walked all this way alone, who had stood in this exact place and carved closure into the world because no one else would. Nathan Jameson had left his memory in every inch of that land. But here he had left his goodbye. Later that afternoon, I brought Dale to the clearing. He didn't say anything when he saw the plaque, just bowed his head. We stood there together, quiet, with Daisy between us. "It's over, isn't it?" I finally asked. He took a long breath. "I think this is as close as we're ever gonna get." The case against Carl Danning moved quickly after that. With Cormack's recorded message, the payment records, and the physical evidence tied to Maddie, the prosecutors secured an indictment. Danning confessed in a quiet room in Tucson 3 days after his arrest. No emotion, no remorse, just facts. Dale called me after reading the transcript. "He said Maddie was the first," he told me. "But not the last. He never named them. Said he didn't remember." I don't believe that. Neither do I. The tapes, the drawings, the letters, all turned over to the state archives. Maddie's case was closed, officially this time. The cold files were sealed with answers. And Nathan? He was never found. Not as a body, not as a person. No record of him after 2002. No sightings, no arrests, no paper trail. But we knew he'd been there. We knew he had watched, remembered, and left a trail so someone could follow it. Daisy had followed it. Weeks passed, then months. The news moved on. The reporters packed up. The field grew tall again. The woods thickened. Daisy changed. She still went on walks, still nudged Buck when he snored too loudly, still followed me to the truck every morning when I went to town. But the urgency was gone. She didn't lead anymore. She walked beside. She slept deeper, played more, ate better. Her ribs stopped showing. Her tail wagged again. Whatever she'd been carrying, it was gone now. One warm afternoon in early summer, I walked with her to the clearing. We didn't speak, didn't dig, just sat near the post while the birds circled high above the oaks. I ran my hand across the plaque one more time. This is where I said goodbye. "I hope you found peace, kid," I said. Daisy rested her head on my knee. Buck barked from the edge of the trees. He was never one for deep thoughts, just wanted us to get back to the house. We walked home slow, the three of us, quiet in that way only the healed can be. 2 weeks later, I woke to the sound of a package being dropped on the porch. No return address. Inside was a single photograph. A man, middle-aged, standing beside a golden retriever that looked a lot like Daisy. In the corner, a name was written. Nathan, and a message. "Thank you for listening." I showed it to Dale. He looked at the man, then at Daisy, then back at me. "Think it's real?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just looked at Daisy. She wagged her tail. And I knew. It was over.